was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I made. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. Just when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old way knew Jesus when I met you. It's when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day. Needed rescue, my sin was heavy. Chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy. Chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is here and I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. 'Cause when you call my name, I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day. They called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of darkness into your glorious day.
First of all, Helen, I want to welcome you to church online this Sunday morning. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, we're enjoying the weather. I mean,
It has been an awesome January, actually all winter.
absolutely. I think sometimes
We have loved
we've been
it.
so used to having such cold winters that
Yeah.
we're almost like looking around the corner. When is it gonna
Yeah.
hit us hard, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think this is a principle. I think that's worth talking about too. Is sometimes we're so programmed
Yes.
to expect something,
Yeah.
and when it doesn't come, We live with that anticipation it's about to or will change. It'll come against us.
And we forget.
And we
We
forget
can
to enjoy the
weather.
moment.
Yeah, it's
We
been
get to forget to enjoy the
beautiful.
moment. And I think
Yes.
in life, it's
Yes.
like that. We
Yes.
can go through all kinds of stuff and
Yes.
have all kinds of experiences that we
Yes.
walk through. And in the midst of that, we miss out the moments
Yeah.
of enjoyment. And I think
That's
that's
right.
part of the journey
Yes.
of life, is learning to live
Yes.
above the circumstances that
Yes.
seem to surround us or speak the loudest to us. And that's why we're here this morning in our live stream, is we want to speak hope into your life. We want to bring perspective and tools for you to learn how to navigate and enjoy your life no matter what's kind of going on. And we want to take a few thoughts out of Ephesians. And I've had the privilege the last number of weeks or so to study through the Greek New Testament. And I'm going through the book of Ephesians, and it's really been impactful on some of the fronts in which I'm walking through and working through, because when you really understand that God has his best in mind for us and not the worst, it changes your perspective.
Yes. Because we've been on this journey, and I know we've shared a bit of it with you. Our view of God has totally flipped. And because the passage that we're looking at today is a part of the reason, and it has freed our journey. It has freed us in so many ways, honey, huh?
I would agree too. For so long, my Christian life felt trapped by expectations of others and expectations of other people's theologies and doctrines, and how that affected how we viewed how God looked at us. And when you come to understand that's shifted for you, and that's shifted for me, it's changed our outlook on how we see how God works, what he speaks, what he tells us, and what he represents. It just changes the whole dynamic. And I think, honestly, for the first time, I'm learning to experience joy in circumstances that I would otherwise be captured, and it would bring me downward spiral. And I think, especially what we've gone through as a country, as a nation, as a world, with all what's going on, it's easy for us to fall into the concept that it's going to get worse, it's going to get bad, everything is going to happen to us. And when we fill our minds with that, it has an effect on how we outlook things. And I want to say, and we both want to say from the bottom of our hearts, is what's ahead and what God has for us to experience. We haven't even tapped into it yet, but we have to learn. We have to learn to see past all these things. And part of the passage that we're going to talk about a little bit this morning, and getting into Joseph's life, how regardless of what was happening around their life, their country, the context of situations, we can see God's provision. And as long as we stay focused on what God is doing and God's speaking, we can have joy in the midst of seemingly chaos. But it takes us to really discipline ourselves, to not feed ourselves with all the negativity. Because when God speaks, I want to tell you, when God speaks, it's always life. It's life. It's never, I think I'm doing something wrong, or I'm just awful, and there's something in between me and God. But when God speaks, that's not the reality, because he always brings life, hope, peace, perspective.
Yes, he does.
And that's what we want to leave it with you, because we're inundated by negative all around us. And no matter where we work, no matter what we do, we're inundated by that. And I think here's an opportunity for us to break from that tradition of negativity and really begin to focus ourselves on what is unshakable, the truths of God.
And we want you to hear.
Yes.
Hit the pause and hear what we want to share this morning, because it is powerful.
It is incredibly powerful.
It has shifted us in how we're walking through even our own circumstances.
Absolutely.
Right now.
Because all of us face them.
Yep.
And it's a matter of what we do while we're in them that determines what happens when we're moving our way
Yeah.
through it. And
So-
so Ephesians chapter 1, it's interesting, Paul, who writes this letter. Now it's important to understand the Ephesians is a letter written by Paul, who was a guy that was kind of in charge of a lot of different things that were going on, church movements and stuff like that. He was kind of overseeing all that stuff. And he's writing a letter to a church. It's important to understand this letter is not written to us. There's principles and there's concepts and there's truths that we can apply to our situation.
Yes.
But you have to understand, the book of Ephesians was a letter written to a specific church.
Yes.
And a church that had influence, a church that a lot of things were happening. Were they perfect? No, they weren't perfect. They went through their struggles and things like that. And what amazes me is Paul writes this letter to the church in Ephesus from a prison cell. He himself is incarcerated. He is in jail.
Yes.
Because of what he stood for and what he stands for and how he was going about his life. And he was writing this letter. And what amazes me is you would think that coming from those types of circumstances, it would come out somewhere in your letters. Somehow it would surface.
I was just thinking, get real here. What would we write to somebody if we were in that place?
And it doesn't even have to be prison or jail. It can be circumstances that seem to limit us and hold us back and come against us, that it seems like our movement forward isn't happening. And when I read Ephesians, I find Paul never communicating from that perspective, but rather he was always communicating from the perspective how God sees them and how God declares truth over him, because he knew firsthand. That revelation transformed his whole conduct.
Totally flipped him.
He was never a victim. He was always a victor. No matter what was thrown at him.
Read his
and when he was writing Ephesians, he wrote from that perspective. He didn't want the church in Ephesus to not know who they are and what God has all done for them, because the moment we allow that to occupy our space, when we know what God has spoken to us and what he has all given us, it will impact how we move from that position on.
Yes, absolutely.
And so it's amazing how Paul addresses that. And so we're just going to bring a few verses out, and I think you want to go into Joseph a little bit here. And it's a great correlation, because Joseph didn't have very good circumstances in his life either, and how he thrived. No matter what decisions are made around him, no matter what situations he faced, he thrived. And he thrived because he understood these principles. These tools that we want to give you. First of all, in Ephesians chapter 1, starting verse 1, it says, this letter is from Paul. Again, Paul's writing not to us, but to a specific church in Ephesus. He says, I'm chosen by the will of God to be an apostle of Christ. I'm writing to God's holy people in Ephesus who are faithful followers of Jesus Christ. And then he says, God, our Father, and the Lord Jesus Christ give you grace and peace. And then I'll just say verse 3, all praise to God, the Father of Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realms, because we are united with him.
Wow.
That's the opening part of his letter.
It is loaded.
It is loaded.
Yes.
How he opens this up.
Yes. I'm just going to read this in the Amplified. Grace to you and peace, inner calm and spiritual well-being from who? God, who is our Father. So that's the source. But grace, what does that mean, honey?
Grace is favor.
It is favor.
It is favor. It is provision. It is the idea where you accept people and you speak value into people. Grace is that aspect. The Greek word charis is grace or favor. And the amazing thing is Paul is writing this letter to a church that's going through some of their own issues, and yet in the midst of it, he declares over them that grace and peace, eirene, is theirs already.
It's already theirs.
And so the first tool, the first perspective we want to give you is grace and peace is already yours.
Did you hear that?
It is already yours.
So what do we do to get it?
It's interesting. The makeup of this writing is he's not hoping they would experience it.
Yes.
He's not hoping that they will understand it so that they can obtain it somehow.
Get your act
But
together.
rather he is declaring it
Yes.
as an already accepted truth in their life.
Wow.
Because Paul himself was experiencing that grace and truth, no matter grace and peace, no matter his circumstances.
Yes.
So it was declared over them as already theirs.
That's amazing.
I think that's powerful to understand that, because many times we can fall into the pattern where we feel like we have to work for that.
Yes.
It is something that we have to obtain to.
That's right.
Or we have to, do this and do this and do this, and that becomes our reality, where Paul
Yeah.
writes declaring that it's already ours.
God's favor is on you. His grace is already
And his
yours
peace is
and
already
mine.
ours. So the
Yes.
challenge then is, babe, is to learn to live with that declaration,
Yes.
live from that perspective. And
Yes.
sometimes that's a struggle.
Yes.
Sometimes that's where the struggle is.
Yes.
But we have to be clear, our struggle isn't to attain it,
Yes.
because it's already declared, it's already ours.
Can we bring Joseph into here?
Absolutely.
Because I'm going to just call him Joe. Because he was a real person. And he didn't have it easy.
No.
He was his dad's favorite. If you look back in Genesis 39:40, that's where his story is if you want to look it up. But he was his dad's favorite, but not everybody thought he was supposed to have his father's favor, right? And so his story, many of you might know it, but Joe faced rejection from his family. He faced false accusation. He was a slave in a foreign country.
Yeah.
He did
Because
not
he was betrayed by his brothers,
Yes.
sold into that slavery.
Sold
So he's taken
to a-
into another country.
sold into a foreign country. This was his life. And he started off with a dream, but it looked like nothing was happening. His circumstances were turned upside down. How could he thrive in a foreign country as a slave,
And then a prisoner.
falsely accused? And I'm just thinking, relate this to your own life. Who's felt rejected by their family? Who has felt rejected
Yes.
by circumstances? Who has felt people are talking about me and it's not all true? There's false accusation going around, and
Or
we're
bringing up your past.
Yes.
Constantly reminding you of your failures, right?
Yes.
All these things.
Yeah.
How can a person thrive? And Joseph was in the midst of that.
Yes.
And something shifted for him, because he realized,
he knew something that we need to know.
yes,
That God was
Yes.
with him in his journey, in his circumstance, in his rejection, in the prison he was thrown in.
Yes.
God was with him, and God's favor was on him.
and as a result of him living out of that revelation.
Yes.
It's important to understand that, because so often we live to attain a revelation, but rather Joseph also, like Paul, lived out of that revelation,
Yes.
that it was already his,
Yes.
not to work for, to strive for, but to live from that perspective.
Yes.
And Joseph began to thrive in no matter what circumstances he lived in. His liberties were taken. His perspective was stolen from him. His dignity was taken from him. There was accusations and lies about him. Yet, folks, in the middle of it,
Blows my mind.
he was faithful, and he prospered, and he prospered so much that even his enemies recognized that God was with him.
Yes.
Not because he was this great prayer warrior
Yeah.
or this great man of the word, and
Yeah.
he would know the word and understand the word, but he lived out of the revelation of what God declared him
Yes.
that was already his.
God's favor was his. His
Yes.
circumstances didn't tell him God's favor was his. God, he knew
Yes.
it inside. And he was living from a freedom that he experienced
Absolutely.
inside.
When Paul writes and says that we have been blessed with every spiritual blessing,
Yeah.
we don't know what they all are, but we have an
Yeah.
opportunity to dig and learn and understand them, because
Yes.
what we most aware of will impact
Yeah.
what we do from this point on.
Yes.
And so the three things that we wanted to leave with you, first of all, grace and peace
Yeah.
are already ours.
Yes.
No matter what context we find ourselves in,
Yeah.
it is already ours. And it's living
Yes.
from that revelation that
Yes.
transforms everything we do.
Yes. And I just want to say, honey, some of us are wanting to live from the freedom that we see Joseph had, but his came from inside.
Yes.
And so can ours.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, grace and peace is already ours. The second thing is,
Our blessings are always outweigh our circumstances.
Yes.
That's why we're able to thrive.
yes,
That's why we're able to endure
Yes.
and rise above. That's
Yes.
why we're not fall into the negativity and despair and all the stuff our mental health can affect us by,
Yes.
because the blessings of God that are
Yes.
already ours
they are already ours.
outweigh our circumstances.
Yes. And this phrase hit me this week. I have everything I need. Joseph knew that.
Yes.
He knew that he had everything he needed, even before he got out of prison.
So we want to make sure that you know that the grace and peace are already yours.
Yes.
It's already
Yes.
yours. We have the privilege to work from that reality.
Yes.
And we speak that into your life. Second
Yes.
of all, the blessings of God far outweigh our circumstances.
Yes.
Sometimes it's about taking the pause and
Yes.
starting to reflect what God has all given us.
Yes.
And living from the perspective of what he declares
Yes.
over our life,
Yes.
and beginning to understand that we can live from that revelation.
Yes.
Oh, it's powerful.
And you know what is powerful? Number 3 is when we know those two truths from the inside, we can begin to give out of that place for other people that are struggling, even when we're
Yes.
still waiting for our own breakthrough, because it
Yes.
starts in here.
Yes,
And Joseph
that
did
is
that
so
too.
true. Because Joseph was still making for his breakthrough.
Yeah.
And yet he was living as if he was already free.
Yes.
The circumstance around him. And I think that's why Paul writes, he starts off with in Ephesians, listen, grace and peace are yours.
Yes.
And not only that, but you need to remember in your context is that the blessings of God always outweigh the circumstances that you're in.
Yes.
And it's coming from mouths of people
Yes.
that were living it real time.
That's the thing.
It wasn't an ideal that they were preaching.
No.
It wasn't something they were saying, this is it. I know, I've heard about this. But they were living. And I think this is the greatest gift that we can give our world in the midst of
Yes.
chaos is stability regardless of what's going around us. The
Yes.
greatest gift we can give the community is a sense of joy
Yes.
in the midst of what's going on, because our eyes are fixed on other things rather than the shifting things of life. And so
Right.
we want to empower you with that hope. When
Yes.
you know you have favor of God and every
yours.
blessing is yours,
It's yours.
you have the freedom
already
to give it
yours.
while you're in journey.
Wow. That is
While
so
you're in
amazing.
journey. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
this
you for
morning.
joining us
We
this
pray that
morning.
you have a great morning.
Just awesome
and
week.
thank you for taking the time to
Yep.
touch base with us. We encourage
Yes.
you to
Connect.
like, subscribe,
Yeah.
and
Love to connect with you.
make some comments. We love connecting with you.
Yes.
And have a great morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us this morning.